Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nazir Afzal, and I am delighted to welcome you to, well, to your own bedrooms or your own living rooms, wherever you are. But obviously delighted that you can join us this afternoon for our for Savera's FGM, Female Genital Mutilation conference, which is tied in, of course, with the International Day for the Elimination of FGM, which is on Saturday. I'm conscious of the fact that we were due to start at 2:30, so I don't know if everybody's joined us. I can't see you. Hopefully you can see me. So what we'll do is we'll progress, and if others want to join us, hopefully they can join us, then please, by all means, do so. Can I start firstly by telling you a little bit about Savera? You're going to hear more from Afrah later on, who is the chief exec of Savera. Love to say that. You're the chief exec of Savera now. And Savera has been working for several years in those crimes and those behaviors that are hidden in plain sight, and FGM being one of them, forced marriage, honor-based violence, and child sexual abuse, and many others as well, and has moved nationally from its Merseyside roots. And I am really privileged that I am a patron of Savera and have been for a few years. And I thank them for the work they do, and I'm sure that you will learn a great deal more about them during the course of this afternoon, or morning, or evening, wherever you are. In terms of running order, can I start with a few bits of housekeeping? There won't be any questioning until the end. Well, I'll explain why in a moment. The chat function online has been disabled for you. But we will be sharing information with you in the chat box throughout. We'll be answering, or you'll be answering, or the panel will be answering questions at the end. And you can submit your questions using the Q&A function that you should be able to see online. If you want to ask a question to one person in particular, please say to whom that question is directed. So use the Q&A and we will hopefully be able to tap into some of those questions, particularly if they are questions that many more of you have asked. And thirdly, really, in terms of housekeeping, there is no room for hate speech. There's no room for inappropriate language. And we would ask, as we would do in the real world, that you are respectful of each other and of the speakers. Now, in terms of why we're here, well, I know why I'm here. It's really important for us to have a conversation, as we are having, about female genital mutilation. Now, in my former role as chief prosecutor, I worked with policing bodies around the country to try and improve the government and the state's approach to female genital mutilation. Unfortunately, we are still in a situation wherein we've legislated against it for more than 30 years, and we've had no successful prosecutions that I can put my finger on, although I think there has been one. But one is far too few, given the length of time the law has been in place. And in part that is because of a lack of training, a lack of understanding, a lack of working, a good working communities. But these are issues that I'm sure will come up during the course of this afternoon's discussion. I don't want to take that all away from you, and you'll be able to see that. But let me say a little bit about FGM from my own perspective. As a prosecutor, there are many cases that were brought to my attention which I thought should be prosecuted, but because the evidence wasn't there, we weren't able to do so. According to the United Nations, something like 200 million women and girls alive today have been genitally mutilated, which puts it in perspective to you. That's an extraordinary number of people, and primarily in 30 countries in Africa and the Middle East, but of course there are instances in Asia and Latin America and amongst immigrant populations in other parts of the world. So we need to recognize that this is a global problem, but in all cases, it's a problem in which women and girls are the victims. And as I've said earlier on, when I led nationally on tackling violence against women and girls, it always struck me how easy it was for men and patriarchy and misogyny to direct what would happen to women. Women that had no choices or very few choices, and FGM being another example of that, where women were simply told that they can't do what they choose to do, and they have to do what men and masculinity and patriarchy says needs to happen. Now, as part of today's conversation, we're going to be, well, hopefully you've had the opportunity to see the link that we sent you. We sent you a link for A Girl From Mogadishu, which is a phenomenal film. Now, I have to admit, I haven't yet had the chance to see that. I have an excuse. I am recovering from COVID. And so I will hopefully, between now and Saturday, get the opportunity to see that. But you will hopefully have seen it. The link is still available until Saturday. The director, Mary McGuckian, is here, as Ifrah Ahmed, who the whole story is based around, will also be joining us during the course of this afternoon. And, you know, it's an extraordinary piece of work from what I'm told. It certainly won awards. It won the Cinema for Peace Women's Empowerment Award at the Berlin Film Festival in 2020. It's powerful, it's inspiring, it's a story you need to know. And I've learned from experience that it's stories that actually get to people. I can give you laws and legislation and section this and section that, but at the end of the day, it's when you hear from people who are most impacted by something like this, that it really resonates with you and enables you to understand what needs to be done and then to do something about it. And that's what we want. It's a call for action today. You know, every year on the 6th of February, we say, no more FGM, and there'll be tens of thousands of women and girls that will be mutilated during the course of the following year. And so at some point, we've got to win this battle and win this war. And it's when we educate ourselves that we can start beginning to educate those people who are responsible for these types of behaviors. As I said, the film marks the UN Awareness Day. And in short, you will hear not only from Ifrah and Mary, but you'll also hear from Anahid. And in fact, what I'll do now, if that's okay with you, is I'll introduce our panelists. Well, they'll introduce themselves. But very briefly, Ifrah is the activist about whom the Girl from Mogadishu is. Mary is the director, and Anahid is the chair of the the Liverpool Arab Festival, with whom Savera are working in conjunction in relation to this afternoon and also in relation to other matters. So what I'll do, if it's okay with you, is I'll ask Ifrah, Mary, and Anahid to say a few words as they introduce themselves. Now, I need to tell you in advance that Ifrah is joining us from Mogadishu, and the signal isn't as good as it would be where I am right now. So I think we have to be mindful of that. Hopefully, she'll be able to join us as and when signal updates itself. And I can't see her right now. But what I'll do is I'll ask Mary and Anahid to introduce themselves and to share their thoughts before we get going. Mary?
Thank you, Nazir. What a wonderful introduction. I can see Ifrah has just popped off. So for the benefit of your participants, my name is Mary McGuckian. I'm a filmmaker, writer-director. I like to focus on gender issues. I was lucky enough and privileged enough to meet the fabulous Ifrah Ahmed some years ago and to understand a bit more about her work and hear her story. And I would reiterate Nazir's view that storytelling is the most impactful way to educate around issues. And Ifrah's story pertained to a lot of issues, gender-based violence issues in particular, that I would feel very strongly about. And she's also a fabulously compelling person. So the combination of character and story is always what I'm looking for when making a film. And I believe we found that with Ifrah, and we've been on the most phenomenal journey over the last few years, bringing her story to the screen, and at the same time trying to create a relationship, as Afrah and Anahid have, between art and issue. And that's been a joyful experience as well. Looking forward to all your questions.
Thank you very much, Mary. Now, given that we've got Ifrah here, I'm hoping that she'll signal at least survive another 5 minutes. Can we ask Ifrah to introduce herself and say a few words? Ifrah?
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me first of all?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Sorry, because I am in Somalia and internet is very bad. I didn't hear the question was asked, but I am delighted to join the panel. And if you say what question you ask again, I will answer. Thank you so
Ifrah,
much.
This opportunity was just for you to introduce yourself and say a few words about FGM. We'll obviously say more later.
Thank you so much. My name is Ifrah Ahmed. I'm founder of Ifrah Foundation and activist campaign against practice female genital mutilation. I don't know what else to say, because I think there will be a lot of questions and I look forward to answer them.
Thank you very much, Ifra. Um,
Thank you.
we're now going to hear from Anahid. Anahid, can you say a few words and introduce yourself?
Yep. My name's Anahid Kassabian. I've been working with Liverpool Arab Arts Festival for more than 10 years. I can't remember exactly how long. First as a board member and now as a volunteer programmer. I'm certainly not the chair, so I don't want to take any credit for things that I don't deserve. But I have always worked with arts organizations about underrepresented communities, particularly from the Middle East. I used to curate an Armenian film festival for some years in the mid 2000s in the US. I'm on the board of a press for underrepresented women, literary works by underrepresented women. And so that's always been my sort of focus. My background is in film and media and music and the place where those intersect. I retired from the ALSOP chair at the University of Liverpool in 2015. So that's what's enabled me to work with the festival in the past 6 years, I guess, more extensively. And I'm in awe of the people I'm on the panel with. So.
Thank you very much indeed, Anahid. I'm just thinking, one thing I didn't say at the outset, I should say, we are recording this afternoon session. It's not really a problem for you because you as the audience can't be visible, but you can certainly see us and we'll be able to see us as and when we decide to publish what it is that we are doing this afternoon. So that's just for your, as a matter of courtesy, to let you know that this is being recorded so that hopefully it can be used as an educational tool going forward. So I want to thank Mary and Ifra and Anahid for their openings. That's all it is. We've got best part of 90 minutes or thereabouts to go, 60 odd minutes. What I want to do now is introduce and hand over to Afra. Afra, as I said earlier on, as the Chief Executive of Savera, it's all over to you, Afra.
Thanks, Nazir. Thanks for that great introduction, and thank you for Ifra and Mary and Anahid for joining the panel. Really appreciate of you working with Savera UK. So I'm just going to give you a bit about Savera and include my kind of story within it. As Nazir said earlier, Savera UK is a national leading charity, so one of the national leading charities tackling culture-specific abuse around forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and honor-based abuse. And the aim about it is kind of to break those culture silence on those horrific and horrible practices. Savera not only provides support to those at risk, but also kind of raise awareness like today, do program project that make in different groups around young people, communities, professional, deliver training, and also do campaign like our Speaking Out campaign is really, really important. Savera's background established in August 2010, and it was as a result of discussion and consultation with the Black and minority communities around the impact of domestic abuse and mental health. That work was led by myself during my time with the NHS. I worked majority of my working career was in the NHS until April last year, once I took the role as Savera CEO as being the founder of the charity and stuff, and identified the lack of service gaps, but also the lack of understanding the culture in term culture that we owe to celebrate and culture that we have to stand against. And I think people really confused between the two. I made it my mission to wanting to demonstrate the difference between the two, to break those stereotyping types of those practices, that not very every person belong to those communities or come from those community mean that they have gone through those practices or practice those issues. We really need to kind of understand those. Just as an example, I come from a Yemeni background, where all of those practices does happen. I definitely could have been arranged at the age of 11, or been forced into a marriage at the age of 11 years old, where my auntie thought this is a custom and traditional, so she had to practice it. But my father didn't and chose difference for my growing up. As professional, as communities, we have an important role to play. It is the only way that we will be able to end those practices. So it's really, really important that we do work together. And it's really time for us to start speaking out and present those, represent those who might not yet able to speak out. And Savera definitely is doing that, not just for days like the International Zero Tolerance of FGM, but all year round. We also have a platform for those who want to speak out and need our support, and our encouragement is really important. Survivors speaking out about their experience is incredible and powerful thing. Something that, like today, the Girl From Mogadishu is clearly showed. The team of Savera was moved and inspired by the film, and that's why we thought it's really important to work together to show these kind of films to our communities and our audience that we work with. We're really, really looking forward to hear more about Ifrah's story here today, and to be inspired more and motivated to make the change in our current system, and do what we need to do to support those who's vulnerable and at risk. Those at risk should not be kept explaining 100 times before someone listen or take them seriously. Never think twice when safeguarding someone. It's really important that we are to be safe than sorry. So I'm just really looking forward to today and more to come, hopefully. So that's me, Nazir.
Thank you very much, Afrah. That's really, really appreciated. And you just reminded me of something. In this morning's Guardian newspaper in the UK, there's an article about some survey that's being carried out, which where particularly the Somalian community are upset, some members anyway, are upset that we're talking about FGM on the basis that it's being used to racialize, and it's being used as most things are, to discriminate against some communities, etc., etc. But my point always has been that, I think you made the point a moment ago, we're not saying nobody, most communities are massively law-abiding. 99.99% of communities that I've worked with and you work with are law-abiding. What we're talking about is that small minority who are involved and engaged in crimes or behaviors that have no place in the 21st century. And I think, I can understand why some communities or some people within communities feel, why are we picking on a subject that focuses on them? That's not the case. What we're doing is we're focusing on the victims. We're focusing on the survivors. They just happen to come from these communities. And I think we just need to push back on people who seem to think, well, don't talk about it, as if somehow not talking about it makes it go away. We know from experience that unless you talk about it, it won't go away. So I'm heartened by what you had to say, and obviously thrilled at the work Savera continues to do. Now, for the next 25 minutes, according to my little calendar or event thing, Mary, who is the director of A Girl From Mogadishu. Mary, the floor is all yours. And in this, we hope that you can explain why you went down this route, what learning there is for you and for us, and ultimately how we can do what the International Day is meant to be, eliminate FGM, based on the experiences that you've been able to pick up from Ifra's story. So obviously we're going to hear from Ifra after you, but the next 20 odd minutes, over to you, Mary.
You're on mute.
Apologies. I was trying to do the first part of the etiquette very well. Turn off the thing when other people are speaking. Thank you, Nazir, and thank you, Afra. And really phenomenal to see such a level of participants amongst the. I can see that just kind of from the setup, taking an interest. I suppose what like a lot of people, the vast majority of people who do not have an engagement with a culture where FGM has historically been practiced, do not really know very much about it. And I would have been one of those as a Northern Irish-born filmmaker, Northern Irish and Irish filmmaker. I was a little bit aware. I'd read some books. I was conscious of it. So, like a lot of people, I think many people are now starting through the media and through media consciousness to hear the phrase FGM and to know that it means female genital mutilation. And that is really, even that simple act of, do most people in the Western world know what FGM is and what it stands for, is something that has evolved over the last 10 or 15 years. I'm reasonably sure that 15 years ago, the vast majority of people, well, the term was only invented in the early noughties, but were aware of what circumcision or female genital mutilation is or was, and the extent of it, the extraordinary numbers, the 200 million women worldwide, and that's always a shocking statistic to say it, the 200 million women worldwide who are living today with the effects of FGM. Not to mention the 3 million annually at least who are at risk in all kinds of communities all around the world. And it is not, as Nazir quite rightly points out, culture or religious or community specific. It is a practice that has found its way into all kinds of communities and all kinds of ethnicities and groups and cultures around the world. In any event, I'm only going on this journey because, as Nazir says, unless we talk about it and recognize it for what it is, we won't make change. But it certainly is the case that having watched the media and the activists who've managed to lift the discussion point to the extent that at least there's a media awareness, and particularly in the UK, The Guardian, as you know, ended up taking on FGM as a specific human rights issue. And that has started to change the culture so that, to an extent, now the vast majority of people have heard of what FGM is. They may not understand the extent of it. They may not have really thought about the impact of it, the health and reproductive rights issues, the human rights issues, the patriarchy issues, but they're aware of it. The more that you make it as regular a topic of conversation, and it is a taboo subject in cultures where it is practiced, therefore it makes it a difficult subject to talk about. And so unless we break that silence, we won't get the response or the impact, the response needed to deal with it at scale. As I always say, it needs to be dealt with consistently at scale over a long period of time. I have the great fortune in my life to spend voluntarily some of my time supporting the activities of Ifra's Foundation as a volunteer and a board member. And so over the last number of years, I've been able to study to some extent the kinds of actions that are being taken globally, to the extent to which they're supported and how effective they are. And what has been shocking to me is the lack of understanding of the extent of it, the lack of commitment by the international community, and particularly the major funders of human rights issues, the lack of capacity the lack of energy and focus that is being specifically focused on FGM. There have been a number of fashions recently which are concerning. One is that FGM overall is considered is kind of grouped together as a sustainable development goal, as Sustainable Development Goal 5E, which is part of a group, which means that it doesn't get separate focus. In many organizations and entities, there's an understandable combining and conflation of child marriage with FGM, which means when you try to do campaigns or focus funding for those activities, they become unfocused. But in any event, it seems there's been a lack of focus specifically on FGM as an issue of massive scale and suffering. So constantly repeating the figure, which we constantly hear, is important. The other thing to recognize, which disturbs me, is that because the focus of the NGOs and IGOs and the Sustainable Development Goal is the abandonment of FGM by 2030, what is not reckoned with or dealt with very much at all, apart from organizations like your own, Savera, at a grassroots level, is the unimaginable consequences of living with the effects of FGM for large numbers of women. And there really are not the funds, or there doesn't seem to me to be the focus or the funds being made available to recognize that suffering and to deal with those effects in the way they should be dealt with. There is some focus undoubtedly on abandonment, and that is a good thing, but nothing like the kind of response that you would expect to an issue of this scale. So when it's a really bad comparison, I'm just going to put it out there, but we are currently in the middle of a pandemic. The response to that pandemic, whether we like some of the responses or not, has been phenomenal. And it has affected millions of people around the world. And we all have empathy for that. And Nazir, I hope you're doing well. It's extraordinary to hear that you're recovering yourself from COVID. Many people have not recovered. Thousands have died. I'm not trying to compare numbers, but let's just state the numbers for FGM. 200 million women worldwide living with the effects, the human rights abuse, the health and reproductive health effects, the cultural issues associated with FGM. That's a very, very, very large number. 3 to 6 million, depending on who you listen to, at risk, not just in Asia, Africa, and the EMEA countries, but in America, in South America, in Europe, in the UK, as you know, and even in Ireland, small as we are. How do we, and I don't have the answer to this, but I provide my skill set, which is filmmaking. How do we get the world to address it as a massive issue? Because it is. You can't say it isn't. And it is, and the needle is not shifting. That's the sad thing. Over the last 5 years, you're reading all the reports and the amount of study that's been done and the infrastructural arrangements that are being put in place to try to address FGM. It's not shifting the needle, if we're being honest. There are lots of fabulous little projects that are doing very good work, and grassroots people are doing phenomenal work in relation to the resources being made available to them. We were given a decent level of resources, like the billions that went into COVID. Imagine the work that could be done. Anyway, that's my kind of concern for the moment. Otherwise, the reason I made the movie is I don't have a history of making documentaries, but what I do find is that, as Nazir said, fundamentally, storytelling that has an emotional impact, that is character driven, does to some extent move people, and when people are touched or moved, they then tend to act. I don't know if that's a helpful contribution to things. I'm really curious to hear people's questions and to answer them as best I can. But anyway, I'm a great believer that FGM as an issue is one of the greatest feminist issues of our time, and we really must start addressing it and giving it the focus and amplify the issue and give it the focus that it deserves. And it deserves a great deal more than is going on right now.
Anahid, thank you. Forgive me, Mary, thank you very much indeed. When I was listening to you, I was, why? I mean, of all the terrible things that are happening in the world, and you just touched on the pandemic, for example, and other areas, why focus? Why do you think this story needed to be told? Why did Ifra's story need to be told?
Well, I'm in an industry that has underrepresented women generally and underrepresented women of color for decades. And I chose to start making the story at a time slightly before #MeToo, when there was some openness in certain quarters to addressing that issue. And it's an issue of great concern to me that young women, and particularly young women of color, look to contemporary culture to see themselves reflected and to understand and get a sense of identity as to who they are, whether they're directly identifying with characters or identifying with scenarios or emotions or stories. And that has been to a phenomenal, appalling effect missing for 20 or 30 years in contemporary culture, well, historically for sure, but it was, the situation was getting worse. And anyway, it has always been my view that at any point that I have an opportunity or potential opportunity to tell a story that might improve that situation, and Ifra's story in a way, just because of the nature of the story and the nature of her compelling character, allowed me to do something that is very rare these days, which is to tell a single character narrative about an independent woman, young woman, that is not a story that relates to her relationship with another male character. It is intentionally a single character narrative. It is her story standing on its own 2 feet. That is bizarrely quite a rare thing in films. And to be able to do that with a character who's Irish, not an American superhero, and who's Irish with Somali heritage, therefore not a nice middle class white person who's somehow washed in a way that pertains to a patriarchal view of the world, was a phenomenal opportunity. And to do it on a topic and on a subject that is so underrepresented. So I guess it was a film that took on underrepresentation generally, but the biggest aspect of the underrepresentation being the issue itself of FGM. But the film, as you know, treats and points to all kinds of sexual violence, gender-based violence, including sexual violence and conflict and racism issues and refugee experiences in the West. All of those things are all touched on in the film.
Mary, thanks for that. I'm going to play devil's advocate with you here. I don't believe anything that I'm about to say to you. Okay. But whenever you see a Black woman represented, she's a victim. Why not focus on a positive story of, well, I know the answer to this question, but I'm asking you the question. Why?
Well, it's unfortunate you haven't seen the film because this is a positive story.
Yeah.
This is not. This is about a survivor. The fundamental thesis, underlying thesis of the script, is the power of testimony. What one extraordinary young woman can do by channeling her experiences to become a force for change, and that is fundamentally Ifra's emotional story to me. That she turned what other people might consider to be victim experiences into those of a survivor of phenomenal competence and reach, who channeled those experiences in a way that any young woman from whatever background has to be empowered by. And that was the reason for making the story. It was to empower young women, not in any way to
no, as I say, I totally agree with all of that, by the way. Just so everybody knows, I did not believe anything of what I said. That was me just telling you something that people might be saying. Yeah. Another issue that relates to that really is you personally, what impact has it had on you hearing Ifra's story and representing it in the way that you have done?
Well, like a great many women, and we know this. I'll tell a story about, Ifra and I attended a conference in Nairobi in November it's November a year ago now, because the year that disappeared. But it was the 25th anniversary of the foundation of the UNFPA, and it was focused on gender-based violence. And the head of the UNFPA stood up to introduce the conference, and in front of 8,000 people, most of whom were women, and we were very lucky to be sitting near the front of this conference, she did an extraordinary thing. She stood up and she introduced herself, and she asked she said, I'm just going to kind of cut to the nub of why we're here. She said, I'd ask every woman in the audience to look to your right and make eye contact or say hello to the person next to you, with them or not. She said, have you done that? Great. Now she said, look to your left and make eye contact with or acknowledge the next female on your left. She said, you are 3 people. One of the 3 of you will suffer gender-based violence in some form during your lifetime. Now, that made the hair stand on my face. It's true, we know this. There is a collective trauma in the female experience. And it affects at least 1/3 of 51% of the population of the world. And 200 million of those traumatic experiences specifically relate to FGM. I'm I'm in the third rather than the 2/3. Like many women have experienced gender-based violence and respond and understand, have an emotional understanding of the trauma. And that interests me because I think it is relative to women from all backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so any woman can watch a Girl from Mogadishu and understand the trauma that is being dealt with in that story.
I'm glad you said that. I mean, for the UK, the figures are 1 in 4 women will suffer domestic abuse. 1 in 5 women will suffer sexual violence. 2 women every week will be killed by partners or ex-partners. 10 women every week will take their own lives because of domestic abuse. We know it's the pandemic that will outlive this pandemic, to put it bluntly.
Great phrase.
Just on that last point you made a moment ago about when people watch it, is, in your view and based on feedback you received, are men seeing it differently to women? You know, when they're watching the documentary, is there a different reaction?
I don't know if they're seeing it. Well, inevitably they will view it from a male perspective. But you know, the great majority of men I meet these days, particularly younger men, have evolved. You know, they're not. And I think there's great compassion there for the human rights abuse that is displayed. And we had a wonderful panel actually, Ifrah, if you remember. I can see Ifrah back again, with the Irish ambassador to the United Nations, who's a
Mary, I was always been here listening the conversation.
oh good, piping
Yeah.
time, Ifrah. I don't want to be speaking for you. But remember
Yeah.
the panel where we had Nitin Sawhney, who's a wonderful, who composed the music for the film, who's a British Indian composer, a British composer of Indian heritage. And he's a great activist in his own right. He's a very strong internal DNA sense of human rights. And he expressed a kind of an indignant outrage that was really quite male, you know, in a language that I wouldn't have. But it was still it was a fantastic reaction.
All right, that's good to hear. As with all of the things that you've just touched on, men are the answer because we're the problem as well. So, so I think the fact that men are receiving it in the way that you have received it and is delivering positive change is absolutely essential. I'm so glad actually, Mary, for what you've done. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. We'll come back to you later with some questions. But given that we've got Ifrah and we have no idea how long for, I'm going to ask Ifrah. I can now see, this is, right, Ifrah, the floor is yours. So for the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so, do you mind talking about your experience of the film, your experience, more importantly, your experiences more generally, and any learning that you think there is for the wider audience? So Ifrah, the floor is yours. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I think Mary have said everything already, and I see you ask tough questions, and I like the way she answered about, you know, the negative empowerment of women, Black women. So Mary say that Girl From Mogadishu is a positive story. What can I talk? Basically, let me begin with the 16-day activism, the launching of 16-day activism, the movie, how we campaigned on social media and how positive it was, and also seeing positive of the country island where there is a COVID and the movie was showing on different cinemas, and that shows how positive the movie is. And it's not because there was a time when people think or hear about female genital mutilation, they go, oh no, Jesus Christ, I don't want to see it, I don't want to hear it. But now you see people more wanted to listen and hear it about female genital mutilation. So for me, I think the movie has given a platform for the campaign in terms of positive change and also bringing male empowerment on the concept of FGM, because as Mary said, that you know the men are also part of it. It means now when people see the movie, I have seen a lot of young men sending me Facebook message and saying how much they're proud of me and how much they feel that I'm speaking their own daughters and mothers and their wives, because this is the truth and this is what's happening in our society. So for me, for Girl From Mogadishu, if I think of like, not always, but just last couple of weeks back in December, how much effort was put in, how much people was effective, and how much people really loved watching and hearing for the movie. To talk about female genital mutilation, it's already have been said. You know it, what's happening in UK. You know it, what's happening in around the world, in Africa. Now I am in Somalia, where FGM 98% is practiced. Last week I was in a Somali region off to Jigjiga, Ethiopia, where I met with people who did not even know the risks of FGM, and where people doesn't know that the consequence of women who are dying for bleeding and all sort of things. So for me, like, FGM is there, and we all know, and we've been saying it, and I believe that way to end is actually involving with the political leaders to have a political will, and the movie is that where we want it to go. Now we have seen the community and the positive. Mary talked about Nairobi meeting with UNFPA, and that has given me power, because it was first time the movie was brought to Africa, and first time the movie was brought to more than 200 people from Africa, every countries, and showed how positive it was people to share. I remember after the movie, men crying outside and women coming to hug me and say, "You are telling our story, not just your story." So for me, I think it's really great that the movie has been made, and it's not just for Europe, but it's also reaching to our community and our society. And I just can say that because of the COVID, that we could not actually bring it in physically to Africa, because I really want to make a tour to African countries, beginning with East Africa, and show to African countries where FGM highly practiced, including Somalia, where women are cut in 98%, and it still is risks of the cut. But because of the COVID, we cannot do. I am here now because of the 6th of February is going to be a big day for Somalia, and I'm lucky that I founded powerful women who will be speaking on female genital mutilation, because I really wanted to see a leadership change, because we all talk about FGM. We all know what it is. We all know the health consequence. We all know the risks of that. We all know everything. But I wanted, what we know to be in action. So I decide now, because I am in Somalia, and I want to take this opportunity to interview a powerful Somali female politician, who are the federal minister of gender, and then the regional minister of gender, including a very powerful former minister and former first lady of Woodland, and then also a very strong activist who has a strong belief of FGM. So I wanted the leader to see. I know now we are facing a political crisis, but it's a good time that where every politician will sit on TV and watch and listen what everybody have to say. And I wanted that the leaders to understand that we need to be legislate FGM, and also the leaders to actually adopted the reality of FGM. And I was in Nairobi, for example, I was in Addis Ababa. I meet with our Irish ambassador in Addis, and our meeting, she promised that she will host the Girl From Mogadishu, where she will invite a high-level, leaders to watch the movie and have a panel discussion. Like what you guys are doing, it's same, because, it brings and lift it up where our leaders to listen what's happening. So for me, really, I have been saying everything about FGM, talking about my personal experience, talking about women have been dying for bleeding, talking about young girls has been cut. But I think now is for me to focus on how can we get the leadership? How can we have the honor of our leaders, global leaders, to adopt this and make it in their agenda as a priority, because that is what we need. We need prioritize of the FGM. We don't need to talk about every day and say FGM is there. We know it's there, but we need the leadership. We need the ownership. We need especially our African leaders, to have their own agenda, FGM. So when they come into power, first thing they will do is, whether if it's a legislation to legislate, whether if it's to raise awareness, it has to be in top politically. And now that is what I really wanted, to have a political will on FGM, because we talked, we have been saying everything, but it looks like what is missing is a leadership. It's missing our leaders to adopt it. You know, United Nations are doing a lot of work. We, Ifrah Foundation, is doing a lot of work, but we are in the leadership. I remember Kenyan president, he went to Canada for Women Deliver Conference, and he promised that he will end the FGM 2022 in his own country. He came back, never, he done nothing. So this is where you have to have accountability with our leaders. When they go to high-level meetings, like UN meetings, like other meetings, we have to have accountability. What they promise, they will do it. So I think for me, 6th of February is my head in my target is that leadership. We need a leadership. Without leadership, nothing will happen. We will continue talking. We have now 8 years, we have 9 years, the United Nations resolution to end the FGM 2030.
Ifrah, can I just?
I think I talked too much.
No, you haven't. I'm intrigued, and I think the audience will be intrigued too. How you went from being a survivor to being an activist. Why you decided to set up the foundation, for example.
I set up the foundation because I remember first time speaking myself as a survivor of female genital mutilation. I met with other survivors on social media who were living in other country around the other side in the world who wanted help. The help they need is, some they might be pregnant and they didn't know what to do, how to talk to doctors. Some they've been subjected on female genital mutilation and they needed to go to doctor and to reoperate again. And then we talked about it and they say, we need someone to talk to. And then I was there and I said, okay, how do you want to communicate with me? Because I set up a group called United Youth of Ireland, and they say they want to talk to me, not the group. So I set up Ifrah Foundation on Facebook, basically, where the young women can communicate with me. In same time, I spoke out and I became a survivor because of my own personal experience going to a hospital and meeting with doctors, nurses who didn't have a knowledge about female genital mutilation. And the first question I get was, how did you get this injured? What happened? Who did it? And all sort of things. In this case, I decided that I wanted to know, if I say this is our culture and it was normal for us, still we have the problem. And when I meet with other young women who had the same thing, that is when I decide we need to tell Irish people that there is a problem and we need to speak the problem.
No, that's really good. Again, I'm going to play devil's advocate. So I'm going to say to you something I don't believe, just to hear your comments. I did some work in Somaliland 2 or 3 years ago. And so I was in Hargeisa and I was talking to a number of people over there. And you're absolutely right. Knowing the figures, 98% of women and girls have been cut in, mutilated. And I was sitting with the Somaliland Women's Lawyers Association, and I just couldn't get it into my head that these women were victims as well, or survivors. But when I was out there, I said, well, why do people do this? Why do they want to continue this mutilation? And somebody said to me, it's a celebration. It's to get acceptance socially. We need, unless we are mutilated, FGM'd, we will not be considered clean. And they talked about how their marriage prospects would be affected if they hadn't been mutilated. That somehow their lives would be negatively impacted if they didn't go down or didn't do the FGM route. Now, I couldn't understand any of that, but that's what they said to me. Is that still what people are saying, that there are some positives?
You see, the problem is when you grow in mentality where people believe that if you're not cut, nobody will marry you or nobody wants you, is something in physically and emotionally you've been abused because you were told something that is not existed. So if I was told this is black and it's a green, I see it's a green, but I was told it's a black, I keep in my head that is a black. So these women you met are women who were told FGM is acceptable, and if you are not cut, you will not have a husband. And they keep in their head that if they're not cut, they're not gonna find a husband. And yes, there is a woman who feels in that way. And for me, is that those people are, mentally being told something that does not exist. And yeah, you're right. I have met with young women who believe that, who says, if I am not circumcised, who will marry me? I'm trying to convince them, you will find it the man you want to live with and man you want to love. But don't believe it yourself that if you're not cut, you cannot find a husband. Because women virgin is not outside, it's inside, and we all know. And if you cut or if you don't cut it, it's same. Because if you never had it, I mean, I don't know, it's really hard and heartbroken same time, the mentality of women in our society. Now you meet with a lawyer who believes that if they're not cut, they are not going to be married or whatever, and they believe that if they cut, they will find a husband. That is still is existed. And that is why I'm trying to push so many women that, don't kill the child, his brain, and don't challenge them. Because if somebody tells you nobody will marry you because you're not clean or you're not cut, the person morally will be disappointed and will feel like nobody will marry you. And this is the truth of how women sees. And this is something that whenever I meet with women like that, I consult with them and I sit with them and I show them the beauty they have in and out, instead of just thinking about female genital mutilation. And just bring in mirror front of them and say, look at yourself on the mirror, talk to the mirror, follow in your head what the mirror tells you. Don't follow what people say to you. If you're cut, you are cut, you're clean, you will find a husband. If you're not cut. So yes, there are people like that in mentality who believe it, if they're not cut, they will not find a husband. And it's very sad, you meet a lawyer and lawyer believes that.
I'm just thinking, the answer, of course, is that men need to change their attitudes.
Exactly.
And then women won't see that as being a positive, or they won't see any positives in that. You mentioned earlier on about your work at an accountability level. I've just like you, I've heard presidents and prime ministers say, right, enough is enough, we're going to stop this now. And then they go back to their countries and they don't do anything. What is your plan of action to get the accountability happening so that change does come?
Well, basically now our government mandate is not extended, because we supposed to be having election by Sunday, but now we are waiting answer from our leaders to say whether is the election or not. But I am waiting the new government. Once they establish, I am going to wear my shoes and my tie, and I will be following everywhere, and I will be pointing every single things that they are mentioning, they will mention in human rights and women's rights. And I will make sure our Somalian government, whatever they say it, every time I speak, I will raise it and say, you say this, you must do it. Because by the new government, or whether it's this government will extend for next few years, I want the election, I wanted the female genital mutilation bill to pass in Somalia. And I am sure that if the government is stable, I will do it. I will never get tired of it till I see. The bill is a piece of paper. It's a celebration. But that celebration, it makes difference. It will encourage me and empower me and other activists and other organizations like UN to celebrate that piece of paper, to say, yes, it's now into legal and we will not accept it, any women to practice on FGM. And surely we will campaign within the community and raise awareness till the community understand the problem of FGM.
If I was the president of Somalia, I'd be scared. Every time I see you, I'd run as fast as I possibly could, because that is just exactly it. It's being relentless, it's being brave, it's being courageous, and that's how eventually they have to listen to you, because they see how important it is what you're saying. And you're not just being negative and saying stop this, you're saying, talking about all the positives and all the benefits that will be brought to the country if they started treating women better.
That's it. You know, now I can say enough is enough. I remember back in 2018, 2017, we met the former prime minister with petition signed 1 million people by Abbas. And I remember the former prime minister, he signed it and he gave the goodwill that the legislation will pass, which he did in his cabinet, but the parliament did not pass. So I think the day I see that our government has reformed the new government, I am putting my shoes on. Till 4 years is that the government existed, so I will never get tired of these 4 years till I see the bill is passed.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it. I think everybody on this call is pleased to hear that you're doing what you're doing and how resilient you are. Thank you so much, Ifra.
Thank you.
Now, if you don't mind, stay where you are. We're now going to open up questions and answers. So, as I said to colleagues at the beginning, some of you already started putting your questions into the QA function, so I can see them on the screen. If you've got any others you want to put up there, please, by all means, do so. This is an opportunity for you to talk to Mary, to Ifra, to understand, and Anahid, forgive me, to ensure, Afra as well, if you're there, to get a better understanding of the issues here and also to perhaps share your thoughts about some of the answers. So if everybody is listening, and I'm talking to my my panelists, I'll ask the first question. Really, this one's to you, Mary, and it's to do about the film, about finding funding for films. Who funded your film? Why? What was their motivation for doing so? And can you give us their number? I mean, so how do you go about it? I mean, it's not a quote unquote sexy subject, but you clearly were able to persuade them. So what did you say and how did you do it?
Well, I mean, you know, it's a great question, and to an extent, funding. What I've discovered with Ifrah Foundation is that it is very challenging funding films at all at the moment, and probably the industry that was funding independent kind of small to medium budget films is coming to an end. Somewhat accelerated by the
Just pause for a Mary. Yeah, if the Azan was playing in Somalia then. But anyway, go on.
I just know that so great question. Film funding is always a challenge in the same way that funding human rights activities and NGOs to go about their work is challenging. Very specifically, this film was funded as many are by kind of consortium of funders, and that's always the difficulty because the agenda of the different parties can often be different. So we had, just to be specific, this was an Irish-Belgian co-production. It made sense because the film was set in Morocco, but also in Europe, particularly in Brussels and in Ireland. So it was an Irish-Belgian co-production. There was some soft funding, there was some tax incentive funding, there were both the endorsement of both the national film bodies, Screen Brussels and Screen Ireland, and then some private investors and the usual difficult, complicated piece of banking that had to pull it all together. It's a challenge. It's not ideal. You always end up compromising. It's hard work, but it's an interesting thing because it's when you have fundamentally what matters when you go out with if this is a film question is the story, is the script, and so if the script is unturnable, downable, it's very hard for people to say no. If you have a script that gets really endorsed and a story that makes sense and that is worth telling, then eventually people have to say yes. And that kind of parries into what Ifra's saying. You know, if you keep asking, and if what you're saying, you know, there is no reason not to support eradicating FGM. There is, there's no parry back. There's no devil's advocate on that one. And so you just have to keep asking.
Mary, just on that point, while we're on the film, Anahid had a question pre today about the style of your film. And do you want to ask her a question about the style of the film?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's sort of two parts, right? The first part is a sort of big, baggy, general one, and you can answer short or long, however you want. But it was about why a biopic rather than a documentary. And I know partly it's your filmmaking history, but also why, what are the advantages of doing a biopic over a documentary? And then the second one was that there's some great fascinating stylistic choices, right? So the first part, when Ifrah is first in Somalia, is more impressionistic almost, right? So for instance, one of the things I found fascinating was that we didn't hear any of the girls making a sound when they were cut. We didn't see any of the cutting. We didn't hear any of the reaction. And then much later in the film, the second half, after she leaves Somalia the first time, becomes much more like an ordinary feature film in style, right? And then at some point, we do hear someone screaming. And I wondered what the decisions were that made the difference in style in the first and second half, and the difference in decisions about screams in the first and second half.
Great questions, and in a way, funny enough, the first question does lean into the second. So your first question was about why a movie rather than a documentary, and I'm always careful to try and avoid biopics because they essentially just document somebody's life, so it's effectively a documentary. So what I was trying to do was not make a biopic or a documentary because, and I suppose the difficulty with the documentary is you're effectively recounting events, and your accountability is to accuracy and factual accuracy. And that's interesting, and there are people who do that very, very well. But sometimes those documentaries, and when it came to Ifrah's story and FGM as an issue generally, there are no shortage of documentaries about FGM. There are amazing documentaries about FGM, but nobody sees them except the little bubble of people involved in the world of FGM. So what I had hoped to do, and it's a challenge, is by taking a different format and telling the story from an emotional point of view, that we might break that bubble, that we might reach a wider audience. And while the COVID of all has made that difficult, it definitely, for whatever reason, people look up to movies. We've been able to, as Ifrah said, kind of get quite significant entry into extraordinary places with the movie. But your second question, in a way, relates to the first, which is my test for a piece of cinema is it's the Thornton Wilder thing, really. It's is there a compelling character? Can you drive the narrative through character? And is there an underlying thesis that warrants a cinematic presentation? And because I'm not an FGM survivor, and I'm not I don't have Somali heritage, it was very important to me that the voice of any such movie would be Ifrah's, not mine. So that informed the choice to tell the story in the form of her testimony. And that testimony dictated the film of two halves. There's the before she got to Ireland and the after. There's the before the emergence of the activist and then the activist. And part of that underlying thesis became the power of testimony. How what you can achieve when you have the courage, when you are empowered to and have the courage to stand up and speak your truth, as Ifrah has done. And that's brought her on an incredible journey from dealing with her own trauma. I don't want to speak for Ifrah on that, but all the way through to encapsulating an entire world and becoming a force for change. And that informed, so the part that is, it's not my voice, it's Ifrah's, it's her testimony, and the film became about the power of testimony, is what dictated the style of the filmmaking. So she tells the story as, in her own words, and we kind of took the various versions of it because Ifrah has been going around the world telling her story for many years. And what I wanted the film to do was for people to recognize, as Nazir and Ifrah just have in their conversation. What I love about the questioning of Ifrah now is, whereas 5 years ago when I met Ifrah, people were saying, and what's it like to have FGM, and can you tell us what it was like? Rather than, what are you doing about it? Tell us about your fabulous work as an empowered young woman going about your business. And it's taken 3 to 5 years for Ifrah to stop being used, and she's so elegant. You're always so elegant and generous about it, Ifrah. And she gently, rather than saying, what are you on? She always very kindly and eloquently and elegantly turns the conversation around from poster child to this is how you go about fixing FGM. And so one of the important things for me not to do was to sensationalize the actual FGM of it all, and to find a way in the context of international cinema culture to tell the story and not to underrepresent or in any way minimize the effects or the experience of FGM, but at the same time not to sensationalize it and horrify audiences, and try to find a way.
I mean, I think a lot of the things that I was, first of all, let me just say, I think it's a brilliant film. I think it's really wonderful. And I've been telling everybody that I've been talking to since I saw it that they should see it, because I think it's really beautifully done, and wisely done. I have to say. And I think one of the things that this film was up against is a thing that people in film talk about a lot, which is how do you, on the one hand, an effective way, and on the other hand, in an ethical way, present horrors that are indescribable, are unrepresentable, right? That people outside of them cannot possibly understand, whether that's genocide or FGM or whatever, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things that fall into that category. And film has the necessity to bring those things to representation, because exactly as you were talking about in your opening statement, the power of film is to bring people stories, right? Bring stories to life for people and to bring people to the stories. Right? And that is, it's an amazing power, but it's also an amazing responsibility. And people who take it seriously, I mean, there are people who are slapdash with it. And, you know, usually those films don't do as well, which is good. But, you know, for people,
more intelligent than people realize.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's exactly right. So for people who are responsible with it, it's so challenging. Every aesthetic decision has to be thought through in terms of its effectivity and its responsibility to the ethics. Every single choice. And I think people don't often understand how intense and hard and long work is of making those decisions, although they know somehow experientially when it works.
And
right?
when it doesn't.
Yes, absolutely. And so I just wanted to hear you talk some about those decisions.
That was the weight of the project for me. The biggest weight was, can I get this to work? Can I get it so that I'm not appropriating culture or objectifying women or sensationalizing the issue or all of those things that we know are so easy to do, while at the same time not under representing it or pulling its punch. And so that was, you're absolutely right, and thank you for recognizing that it's a very, very fine balance, and particularly because in different cultures it's different. But there's a very simple answer to it, and it just involves soul searching, which is, if what is the intention? You're very clear as to the intention, and your craft. What is the as you say, ethical or correct way to create the scene or create the shot that it doesn't do any of that damage, that isn't unethical, that has its intentions in the right place, then it answers it for you. Then you get your answer.
Thank you, Mary. Again, I've made the admission that I've not seen the film yet, but as I understand it, there's a male cutter in the film. Now, I hadn't come across a male cutter. This is really a question to you, both you and Ifra. How common is this? I just assumed that they were all women.
Do you want to answer that, Ifra? You're on mute, darling.
I said, Mary, you go ahead.
Now you're on mute.
Yes, I'm on mute now. Sorry. The specific story was about. I suppose there were also. I mean, it isn't uncommon, as I understand it. The Ifra's specific experience was that there was a trained doctor who was a relative, who performed the FGM on that occasion. There are all sorts of people. I mean, one of the things that you may be aware of is that in Egypt, for example, with the best of intentions, Madam, gosh, I've forgotten her name, the wife of the great Egyptian, long living Egyptian premier.
Sissy?
No,
Um,
that's Tunisia.
Mubarak?
Yeah, yes, I think it was Madame Mubarak. Yes, decided that it would be an idea to, if you can't end FGM, why not at least medicalize it? And so it's been very, very hard to, whereas Somalia has the highest incidence in the world, Egypt is the country with the highest um, numbers uh, of performances of FGM, and that's partly driven by what was a well-intentioned but misplaced campaign to bring to decriminalize certain levels of FGM and bring it and bring the practice into a clinical setting.
mm,
And so, as a result, it is mostly male doctors who, as I understand it,
no, I'd heard that.
Somalia.
Thank you so much, Mary. Can I? These are questions from our audience, so we haven't got a lot of time. So, if you don't mind, quick answers. Quick answers. Let's solve this problem overnight. Ifrah, there's a question for you, a personal question for you. Given your high profile in this area, what's been the impact for you from your family as you try to eradicate FGM? Your family or your community?
I think I meet with a lot of young women during my 6 years in Somalia, and I became a friend some of them, and there were some first-time mothers, and some they were like fourth child or third child, and all their last daughters is called Ifra and it's not cut. And that is one thing I can just see that as an impact, because I have money. There is a many Ifra who are not cut. Plus, my family, there is a young woman who have a daughters. I actually try to convince them that they shouldn't be doing. Then talk about my community in Somalia. We have been doing a lot of community engagement, FGM ambassador network. We trained so many women, and especially women in IDBs who are dying for bleeding. So what happened is that December last, we trained about 80 women and we distribute to them 80 radios. So whenever there is an activity on FGM on the radio, we call the gatekeeper and we make sure the women to listen the radio. So this radio, it helped them to understand the risks of bleeding, the death of FGM, and also religious leader. We actually convinced the gatekeeper to become really a pregnant woman. So in case there is any risks, she can take them to hospital safely to give birth. Because during the COVID, we had a big challenge of women dying in the IDP centers because the government, they were taking anybody who was taken to hospital as a COVID patient. They were scared to go to hospital. They've been allowed to die at home for bleeding. So only end of last year, I can say something I'm very proud, saving 20 pregnant mothers and 20 baby who are still to born, because we have evidence that women died in IDBs because of bleeding, because of FGM. So when we train them, I make sure that no more women should die for bleeding. So if I save 20 women, I save 20 children as well, like babies, whether it's a girl or whether it's boys. So I am so proud that I did and I could do something that, well, I'm not even in the country and I locked in myself in somewhere in Dublin. So that is something I can really say is a big achievement, because COVID has actually risked our work to be in the grassroots and the fields. And the risk was young girls, the schools were closed and young girls were at risk to be cut because the school was, Holy Quran were closed. But I was so happy to be given the opportunity by the Global Media Campaign, who are very much support media and FGM, and also Ifrah Foundation through UNFPA support to do this training and voice it for the women to make sure that no more women dies for bleeding. They can contact with our ambassador network to make sure women are brought in safety to hospital. So that is something I can say I'm very proud even over all my work, because this has showed me, COVID has teach me a lot and a different, and show me, give me more strength and show me way to strengthen myself to say, yes, I can do it. And I am happy that it's happening. And I brought it, now I just come from Ireland, so I brought a lot of baby clothes for those pregnant women that I am going to distribute them next on Saturday, International Zero Tolerance on FGM.
I know you're an astonishing person, Ifrah. There's a question that's been asked by Albion and Felicity. I'll read it to you. They say, friends here, this is them, friends here in the UK who have been cut all say they ends with them. So they know, that's the end of FGM as far as they're concerned. They see it as wrong and unacceptable, but only when they were here and not in their original homeland. So at what point did you see it as a harmful practice? Was it in Mogadishu, or was it when you were in Dublin? When did you, from your own mindset, when did you become aware that it was wrong?
Well, you see, in Somalia, I lived with my grandmother, and I can remember first time I get my period as a young girl. And I remember when I've been very ill, my grandmother would tell me to drink something hot and you'll be fine. But when one thing I can say is that Europe and Africa is different. Somalia and Ireland is different. The difference is that the health access, you can access health in Europe where you cannot access in Somalia. So, for example, in Somalia, when I get sick, I was given some kind of traditional medication or medical support, where when I come to Ireland, I was given opportunity to go to hospital, check myself, find my problem, talk about it, and say it what it was. So these are the two different things. And more women who are in Europe or UK who find out they've been through on female genital mutilation, when they realize when they came to Europe, is that they had a free access to medical, and that has given them opportunity to understand their own body and themselves. And that is me also, that I become to know my body and myself when I come to Europe, where when I was in Somalia, I was given traditional support when I get my period. So that is the complete difference on Somalia and Ireland.
Thank you for that. I think that answers the question. Question for Afra, well, not really a question. Afra, some people can't access the link and would ask, please, that you resend it so they can access it. The question that flows from that is to you, Mary, is about, will this get a wider audience? Will we ever be able to see it in the cinema or in some other way?
I wish, it was incredibly unfortunate timing that COVID, actually, the film was due to have been released last April, and we'd just been building up to all the screenings and premieres around International FGM Day on the 6th, and then International Women's Day on the 8th. And around the weekend of the 5th, 6th of March, suddenly that whole campaign got cancelled. And the entire release in Ireland, UK, and US, which was a great shame. By the time, and nobody knew how long COVID was going to last, so it is pretty widely available. We did get a window in Ireland to release it in cinemas, because the cinemas were open for the 3 weeks before Christmas, and 26 cinemas in Ireland booked the movie. But every time somebody booked a ticket to go and see it, there were 12 seats around them blocked off. So not many people could go. So it's been a great shame. In the US, they but on the other hand, we've now skipped that window effectively. So it is very available. It's available in the UK and Ireland on all those, iTunes, Sky, Amazon, all of those, and it's on Showtime in the US and plays every day, as far as I can see, since July.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I've just got the answer to the other question about the link. If you email info@severauk.co.uk, we'll be able to help you in that. Now, one final question for everybody, really, and this is about everybody listening to you wants to know what they can do. So as a safeguarding professional, as a whatever their role and the responsibilities may be here in the UK or anywhere, wherever they may be, what one or two things can they do to make some of the, nothing like the impact that you and Ifra have been able to make, but what can they do? So if I don't mind, if I start with you, Mary, then we'll go Mary, Afra, Ifra. I don't know. It's up to you. Whoever wants to say something, say something. So we'll start with you, Mary.
I am going to say, oh, Mary, that's good.
No, off you go, Ifra. Go on.
No, I think maybe I will say it after you say it, because
Okay. Well, I
Nasir chose you.
Somebody who isn't in that because we can't all be Ifra, but we can all do something.
Yes.
And for example, if you have any capacity on social media, a lot of campaigning and activism goes on social media. If you've any interest in gender-based violence generally, or if you want to make a slight donation to anything, make sure you make it to a grassroots organization like Savera or Ifra Foundation. If you a very simple thing to do is just to talk about it a lot. Keep reminding the world that this is a big issue that still needs to be dealt with. The more awareness there is, the more the world will pay attention.
Yeah, and I want to add one quick thing, which is that you're muted, Nazir.
The phrase of the year is "you're on mute," isn't it? Everybody is.
Yes.
Anahid, up to you. What can people do?
Just really quickly. The fundraising and the discussion of FGM, I'll leave to the experts. But one of the most important things in film is word of mouth. It's widely known. Films fail and succeed on the back of word of mouth. So you can have Zoom parties to watch the film and discuss it afterwards. You can, as Mary was saying, post on social media. There's all kinds of ways that and just talking in conversation, you can point people to the film, because very obviously for everybody who's seen it, the film will bring the issue up to the surface of people's consciousness. Even if they knew about it before, they'll know about it in a whole different way. So anything you can do to bring attention to the film will be assistance to the issue.
Thank you, Anahid. Afra, what's your challenge or advice to the people watching?
I think from the work that we do, what I'd like to do is I'm going to point it to professionals that within their workplace make it a mission to speak about it during your team time. Do special training around it to understand it. But if anybody comes, and that's our one chance rule, if anyone comes to ask for your help or request your help, please, the first thing you do is believe them and take them seriously straight away, because that is the most important. I think that's why many do not come forward. Fear of not believed and fear of not being supported, and listen to them and make sure that you really take them and take what they say extremely serious, because you could be their last point of chance to save a life. So that's my message.
No, that's absolutely right. Linked to that is the fact that people will probably need lifetime support. Just simply helping them through the immediate crisis is not enough. You've got to be there for them as they move on with their lives. So thank you so much, Afra. Ifra, what's your challenge? What are you asking the audience to do differently?
First of all, I always say that Tesco bag says every little helps. Mary said everyone can get involved. So I say every little helps. Whoever they can support, they can support. Also, sharing the posters on the words and sending message around, telling friends and everyone what's happening, they can say it. Because nowadays, social media can become a powerful tool to awareness. Only money doesn't help, but also sharing the message, telling everyone, your neighbors, your friend. One thing I want to remind you all is that you are living neighbors who are at risk their daughters to be cut, who are at risk their daughters to be taken back to the original country where they are at risk to be cut, and also forced marriage. So remember, the girl who will be cut, she's in a classroom, your own daughter. She is friend with your own son. Is a girl you see every morning when you drop your daughter. So please get involved any way you can to support ending FGM and around the world. As United Nations target 2030, we will reach that point where we can all celebrate and say, yes, now it's end female genital mutilation. Thank you.
Ifrah, thank you very much indeed. And you just reminded us the linkages throughout all of this. I mean, there are probably 50 shades of violence against women and girls. They start at feticide, infanticide, early and forced early and child marriage, FGM, forced marriage, honor-based violence, domestic abuse, sexual violence, domestic homicide, you name it. And the victims throughout are women and girls. And if there's anything I would say to you as an audience, it's about engaging with men, because men need to be part of this. They will be, as allies. It's clearly an issue of human rights, not just of women's rights, and it's important that more men are engaged in this subject. So please talk about it, share the stories, watch the film, and engage with people. And don't just do it on the 6th of February, do it 365 days a year and 366 in a leap year, because I think that is how you will change things, if by constant communication and constant engagement. I'm done. And I now pass you over to Afrah, who will, I think, close today's ceremony. And I think there's a song as well at some point.
Yeah, so just before we go into there's a video that the Savera youth have done last year, which is around ending FGM, written and performed by our youth group. So it's but I just want to thank all the panelists for this amazing, informative afternoon. Really appreciate it, and the powerful film that helped us put this together. But also to all the audience who really stayed with us and joined the conversation, and more of these conversations should happen. So not to worry.
FGM. Female genital mutilation, let's begin. I can't comprehend how they feel. They coat the skin, the inner lips and the outer lips. They sew it up with a pin. They constantly do it over and over again. The mothers or fathers will do it without the consent. How do you expect your women? How do you expect to please your man in bed? We need to protect our women. Going through with this could leave them dead. Going through with this could messing with their heads. Leave them stressed, they could even get depressed. Left with scars that will never leave them vexed. Who's up next? Stop this, this not religious. This can't be culture, would they forgive it? They know the mothers probably do it because they love them. They say they're protecting them. Wanna be a virgin, so they defend she. Only agrees to fate in society, she may wanna please it. Family, I agree to a degree. Everybody will let to fate in society if it but my pain and it wasn't meant for me. My body's sacred, I can do what I please. This should be the mentality, but some do disagree. Let the fly bomb will be. Education is the key. Don't be teaching low key. You can still lose your virginity even if you don't go through FGM. You can still lose your virginity even if you don't go through FGM. FGM, we condemn, cause mayhem. Yes, this is not pretend. No. Gotta transcend, be there for a friend. Yes, if they're showing signs, then you need to get help. Yes, I stuck for the medication. Yes, we do need to be patient. Men don't wanna talk hesitation because of the hair she be facing. Hearts racing, wants to speak out, but it's our situations into frustration. Next she relocating. FGM, female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation. FGM, we condemn, cause mayhem. This is not pretend, no. FGM, Female genital mutilation.